Welcome to Congress in Context, your weekly deep dive into the legislative landscape shaping our nation.
Great to be here.
Today, we're unpacking something really crucial, a fascinating field hearing held recently at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It was all about the Defense Production Act, the DPA.
Yeah, and this isn't just some dusty old law. The DPA is absolutely fundamental to our national security, our economic resilience too, and importantly, it's set to expire this September, so there's a real sense of urgency.
Right, a deadline looming. And what's really interesting, I think, is how this one act connects to so many things. Military readiness, sure, but also the supply chains for, like, everyday stuff you use.
Exactly. It's surprisingly far-reaching.
So our mission today is to give you a clear, engaging, and balanced look at the DPA. We'll cover its history, how it works now, and why there's this urgent push to modernize it. We'll be using insights straight from the military folks and defense contractors who testified.
And it's easy to hear Defense Production Act and think, abstract policy. But we'll see how it actually dictates things like how fast the U.S. can make critical weapons or whether certain essential materials are available. It even affects American innovation and jobs.
It really gets down to the nuts and bolts of our industrial strength, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, more than people might realize.
Okay, let's dig in. The DPA has quite a backstory, right? Goes all the way back to 1950, the Korean War era.
That's right, 1950. Its original goal was pretty clear. Mobilize the country's industrial base for national emergencies. And critically, it was about prioritizing making things here domestically instead of relying on foreign sources.
And is that original idea still relevant?
Oh, absolutely. More than ever, arguably. One official at the hearing really stressed today that the DPA is not a Cold War relic. You just have to look at our growing dependence on foreign suppliers for critical things. Semiconductors, rare earth minerals, even pharmaceuticals, that dependence is a big vulnerability.
Yeah, you definitely feel that vulnerability more these days. We heard testimony mentioning how the COVID pandemic exposed what they called a reactive posture. What does that actually mean?
Well, reactive posture basically means we wait for a crisis to happen before we try to ramp up our industrial production instead of, being prepared ahead of time.
So scrambling after the fact.
Exactly. And the pandemic showed, as they put it, that waiting for crisis results in a delayed response and not always well thought out solutions. It just drove home the need for a more proactive, sustained approach. You have to build that resilience before you need it.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, the DPA isn't just one single thing, right? It has these three core parts, these titles. Let's start with Title I. That's about prioritization.
Yeah, Title I gives the president the power to make industries accept and prioritize defense contracts. This happens every day, actually, for what they call priority capabilities. Think things like long-range missiles, missile defense systems, or restocking munitions quickly.
So pushing certain defense needs to the front of the line.
Precisely. And there's even a special designation, the DX rating, for the absolute highest priority things. It's like a super fast pass, putting that project ahead of almost everything else, even other defense needs. Then you have special priorities, which are more about tackling specific bottlenecks that might be slowing things down.
Okay, so Title I directs industry. But what if the industry isn't actually making enough of what's needed? That's where Title III comes in, the investment part.
Exactly. Title III is described as a force multiplier. It steps in when the regular market forces just aren't enough to meet defense needs. It allows the government to directly invest in building up that industrial capacity.
So putting money directly into creating or expanding production lines.
Right. And the numbers are pretty significant. Between fiscal years 2020 and 2024, they awarded something like $2.88 billion across almost 200 projects. And for FY25, they've already awarded over $500 million. Plus, there's cost sharing from the companies receiving the funds, about $88 million recently.
Wow, that's serious investment.
It is, and it signals a strategic shift, moving beyond just relying on the market to actively building the capacity we need for security. The projects are really diverse, too. Things like restoring production of critical chemicals, expanding factories for solid rocket motors, or setting up secure supply chains for strategic minerals.
Creating capacity where the market alone wouldn't. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we've got prioritization with Title I, investment with Title III. What about Title VII? That sounds more defensive, dealing with screening foreign investments.
That's right. Title VII is about protecting our supply chains through the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS. The Department of Defense actually co-leads about 6% of all CFIUS reviews.
So they're looking at foreign companies buying U.S. assets.
Yes, especially anything that could impact national security. And they're quite proactive. Just in the past year, they referred over 75 deals that hadn't been voluntarily submitted for review but raised potential concerns. They call them non-notified transactions.
Interesting. So they're actively hunting for potentially risky deals.
They are. And they've recently expanded CFIUS reviews to cover more real estate deals, especially land near military bases. The idea is to stop potentially hostile foreign money from gaining control over sensitive areas.
Why is land near a base a concern? What's the risk there?
Well, it could be several things. Espionage, maybe setting up surveillance points, or potentially disrupting base operations, logistics, personnel movements, especially in a crisis. Even cyber attacks targeting local infrastructure could be launched from nearby properties. It's about securing the immediate vicinity of sensitive sites.
Okay, that puts it in perspective. And speaking of bases, the hearing itself was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Why there? What's their role?
Wright-Pat is actually a major hub for implementing Title III, the investment part of the DPA. The Air Force Research Lab there has an office, the Executive Agent Program Office, that manages a lot of these Title III projects.
So they're the ones overseeing where that money goes and how it's used.
Pretty much. Their job is to make sure these funded projects actually get integrated into real military systems and to fix vulnerabilities in the industrial base. And they manage Title III money from all sorts of sources. The core DPA funds, yes, but also money from the CARES Act, Ukraine aid, the Inflation Reduction Act, Indo-Pacific funding, Israel security funding.
That's a lot of different funding pots. Does that cause any headaches, having money from so many different places with potentially different rules or timelines?
It absolutely can. While it shows how broadly the DPA is being applied, all those different funding sources often come with different expiration dates. And that can be, as they put it, an execution hindrance. It makes long-term strategic planning harder when the funding streams aren't consistent or predictable.
Right. Hard to plan a 5-year project if the funding might dry up in 2.
Mm.
That leads us to the urgency question. Given these complexities and the DPA expiring soon, why the big push for modernization now? What vulnerabilities are most worrying?
The hearing laid it out pretty starkly. Intensifying geopolitical competition, especially from China. You've got increased cyber attacks hitting aerospace and shipbuilding companies, China restricting exports of critical minerals, plus rising costs across the board for defense manufacturing.
And specific examples.
Yeah, they mentioned U.S. shipyards being overburdened. Munition suppliers are running flat out, operating at maximum throughput, but still can't meet potential surge demands. It paints a picture of an industrial base under serious strain.
To get a ground-level view, they brought in contractors. Let's talk about Robert Faxon from Consolidated Boring, Inc. They make warheads, components for missiles like the SM-3 and SM-6, even the big bunker buster bombs. What was his main point?
Faxon zeroed in on a huge gap between demand and capacity for large rocket motor cases. Think casings for missiles. The yearly need across key programs is about 3,000 units, but the current U.S. capacity, only 350 to 400 units a year. It's a massive shortfall.
Wow, 3,000 needed, maybe 400 produced. That's a big gap. What did he suggest?
He proposed building a new, vertically integrated factory that could make 3,000 cases a year by itself. He argued it would create around 300 skilled jobs and even save money, maybe 10% per unit.
And what did he say was needed from the government to make something like that happen, or just to bridge the gap generally?
His key asks were for multi-year predictable funding. There's that predictability issue again, and a streamlined application process for Title III funds. He had a powerful line. If industry is being asked to move at the speed of war, then our partners, being the U.S. government, will also have to move at the speed of war.
Makes sense. You can't have one side sprinting while the other walks.
Exactly. He also argued for supporting the broader commercial industrial base, making it more flexible so it can pivot to defense work when needed.
Okay, strong message there. Now, the other contractor was Gordon Fallon from Beehive Industries. They're in additive manufacturing 3D printing, specifically for jet engines used in drones and uncrewed systems. He offered a really stark cost comparison in the Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, it was striking. He pointed out Russia is hitting Ukraine with over 700 drones a month. These drones cost maybe $50,000 each. That's over $6,000 a year. Ukraine's defense often relies on Patriot missiles, which cost anywhere from $1 million to $4 million each, and they can only make about 2,000 Patriots a year.
So do the math.
Right. His conclusion was stark. It currently costs the Ukraine about 50 times more to defend itself than it costs Russia to attack it. That kind of cost imbalance is just unsustainable in a long conflict. It really challenges deterrence.
That's a massive asymmetry.
Yeah.
So how does Beehive's technology, additive manufacturing, help address that?
Well, Fallon argued it's potentially transformative. He said they can 3D print jet engines that are 25% more efficient, cost less than half as much, can be developed and fielded in a quarter of the time, and this is key. They can scale up production to over 10,000 engines a year in under 3 years, all at less than 20% of the cost of traditional supply chains.
And presumably made entirely domestically.
Yes, that's another huge advantage, eliminating the risk of relying on foreign parts for critical components like engines. Big win for supply chain security.
So what did Fallon recommend for the DPA, specifically Title III, to help companies like his scale up?
He had a few key points. First, preserve and clarify Title III's authority to help companies move from prototype to production. Second, tailor programs for what he called agile advanced manufacturers. That means using faster, more flexible contracting methods like OTAs, other transactional authorities instead of complex traditional contracts, and maybe adjusting the cost share requirements for these innovative firms.
Making it easier for smaller, cutting-edge companies to participate.
Exactly. He also called for strengthening domestic supply chains for essential materials, like the high-temperature nickel superalloys and titanium needed for advanced engines. And finally, really importantly, aligning U.S. EPA efforts with allies, NATO, AUKUS, to standardize things and coordinate industrial-based efforts.
That point about allies seems crucial. Why isn't there more standardization already? Is it just historical accident?
It's partly historical, yeah. Nations built up their own defense industries, often with unique requirements. But I think there's a growing realization that modern conflicts demand speed, scale, and interoperability that the old model just can't deliver. So the path forward involves setting common standards, sharing tech, maybe even co-funding production lines that can serve multiple allies. It's about building that collective industrial strength.
Well, encouragingly, it sounds like there's bipartisan agreement on the need to modernize the DPA. Both Chairman Hill and Subcommittee Chairman Davidson seemed on board.
Yes, there was definitely a sense of shared purpose there.
Yeah.
And they recognized the need to balance investments, putting money into cutting-edge tech like hypersonics or radiation-hardened microchips, but also shoring up essential older technologies like casting and forging capabilities, which are still fundamental.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit and look at the broader strategic impacts. We mentioned critical minerals earlier. That seems like a huge focus area.
It absolutely is. China's control over markets for things like copper, and especially rare elements like rhenium, which you need for jet engine turbines and comes from copper smelting, that's a major vulnerability. They highlighted a DPA project that actually found the purest nickel deposit in the U.S., significant enough that samples are now in the Smithsonian.
That's more than just a museum piece, right? It changes the domestic supply picture.
Fundamentally, it reduces reliance on potentially adversarial sources and boosts self-sufficiency. The DPA is also crucial for missiles and munitions expanding capacity before a conflict starts. And in shipbuilding, there's deep concern about how much capacity we lost after the Cold War. The DPA is being used under the Maritime Dominance Executive Order to expand shipyards and train workers.
So it's hitting these core defense areas.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just weapons and ships, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We saw that clearly during COVID. DPA authority, funded through the CARES Act, was used for healthcare needs, ventilators, needles, syringes, PPE. It also supports the U.S. textile industry through the Berry Amendment, which mandates nearly 100% U.S. content for military clothing and textiles. Maintaining that domestic capability is about resilience.
Okay, let's shift to some operational challenges. There was a great question raised. If everything gets a priority rating, what's a priority? How does the system handle that?
That's a classic dilemma, right? The answer seems to be the tiered system, that DX rating is used sparingly for the absolute top priorities. As someone said, there is only so many silver bullets you could spend. Then, those special priorities allocations are used more surgically to fix specific bottlenecks that affect multiple programs. It's about being strategic with prioritization.
And what about the people running these programs? Are the DPA teams big enough? Is there too much bureaucracy?
The testimony suggested the teams within DoD and the Air Force Research Lab are actually quite small, but highly skilled. They did ask for at least 2 more civilians for each of the programs and titles, basically to help process applications faster. It suggests they're trying to stay lean, but need just a bit more bandwidth to keep up, not adding layers of bureaucracy, but targeted help.
We touched on funding earlier, the different pots of money with different expiration dates being an execution hindrance. Could you elaborate on how that actually slows things down?
Sure, it creates uncertainty. If you're a company considering a major multi-year investment, building new facility, buying expensive machinery. You need some confidence that the funding will be there for the long haul. If the money comes from different supplemental bills that expire at different times, it's hard to make that long-term commitment. It complicates planning and can delay projects.
Got it. Now let's talk about risk. Title III involves government cost sharing. How does that help companies, especially when they're being asked to build capacity for something the market might not fully demand yet?
That cost share is crucial for de-risking the investment for private industry. Even if the government only covers a portion, say 50% or even less sometimes, though Beehive mentioned 50–80% for them, it dramatically lowers the barrier for private investors.
How so?
It makes the company a safer bet. They can raise the rest of the capital they need more easily, probably at better interest rates. It extends their financial runway. It essentially bridges that gap between the forecasted defense need and the current market reality. Industry is often hesitant to invest heavily in very expensive systems to ramp up for if the orders aren't guaranteed yet. The government chair says, "We believe this is necessary and we'll share the initial risk."
That makes sense. It helps bridge that valley of death between R&D and full production. What about smaller companies? There's often a perception the whole defense procurement system favors the big players. Were there suggestions on how to better engage small and mid-sized innovators?
Yes, definitely. That perception is real. Contractors suggested using those OTAs, other transactional authorities, more often. They're generally more flexible and less burdensome than traditional complex government contracts, which can be overwhelming for smaller firms.
Less red tape, basically.
Pretty much. They also floated the idea of reducing the cost share requirements specifically for smaller businesses. And one really interesting suggestion was for the DPA folks to be more proactive, to actually get out and go see them, take officials with enough authority to make an evaluation on the spot, and maybe even metaphorically give them a checkbook, give them authority to speed things up.
Wow, a much more hands-on, less bureaucratic approach.
Exactly, more agile.
Now, here's an idea that sounds counterintuitive for business. Using DPA funds to pay for buffer stock of materials. Why would that be necessary?
It sounds odd from a just-in-time inventory perspective, right? But it's about mitigating lead times. Some raw materials or intermediate components, like forgings or things from rolling mills, can take months to get. Yeah, months. If a crisis hits, you can't afford to wait that long for materials to even start production. Having a government-funded buffer stock ensures that factories have the raw materials on hand immediately, even if it runs counterintuitive to typical business practice. It's about buying resilience against those long lead times.
Buying time, essentially.
Exactly. Buying time and ensuring immediate response capability.
And finally, circling back to allies. How critical is that alignment piece, common standards, materials in the bigger picture?
It's seen as increasingly vital. Think about additive manufacturing again. If allies use common standards, common materials, even compatible punter types, you enable truly flexible distributed manufacturing. Meaning, in a crisis, an ally could potentially print a needed part for U.S. equipment or vice versa very quickly. It allows for rapid scaling and redundancy across the allied network. It strengthens the entire coalition's industrial base, not just our own.
So bringing this all together, what are the big future implications? The main message seemed to be urgency.
Absolutely. The consistent message from everyone who testified was that the stakes are too high for delays in reauthorizing and modernizing the DPA. One official really hammered it home. Don't overestimate capability because you open a checkbook, it may not buy time. So urgency is my message today.
Money helps, but it can't buy back lost time.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're talking about building complex industrial capacity and preparing for potential conflicts.
So what does this modernization effort really mean for building a more resilient industrial base overall?
It's about shifting fundamentally from that reactive posture we talked about earlier, moving towards proactive, strategic investment and planning, building a defense industrial complex that's not just strong, but also more responsive, more distributed, and better able to anticipate future challenges.
And how does innovation fit into that, like the additive manufacturing example?
It's key. The goal isn't just to rebuild old capacity, but to integrate new technologies like additive manufacturing alongside traditional methods. It's about finding the right mix to meet future demands faster, more efficiently, and often more cost-effectively, blending the best of the old and the new.
Ultimately, then, the DPA is really the tool that translates strategic goals into actual industrial capability, making sure the warfighter has what they need when they need it.
That's the bottom line. It's the mechanism for turning priorities into parts, materials, and readiness. It's absolutely foundational.
It certainly is, and its future shape is clearly critical. So for you listening, how can you stay informed and maybe even engage with these vital discussions?
Well, resources like congress.gov are great. You can track bills, see votes, find committee hearings, and follow the progress of DPA reauthorization.
And you can always find out who your representatives are and contact their offices. Let them know what you think about issues like this. Hearing from constituents does make a difference.
Absolutely. And if you want to go really deep, transcripts of these congressional hearings are usually available online too.
Okay, as we wrap up, here's something to think about. This whole discussion about the Defense Production Act really underscores something important. National security isn't just about the high-tech weapon systems, the battleships, the jets.
Right. It's deeply connected to factories, to complex supply chains, even to the basic raw materials that make up our modern world. It's about our ability to make things.
So the question for you is, how might thinking about our country's industrial resilience through this DPA lens change how you look at global events or economic policy, or maybe even the everyday products you rely on? Definitely something to mull over.